Thank you, Eddie. I have to say that this is our second quarterly meeting, if I'm not wrong, that we are meeting in person. And it just feels so good to see each other. So thank you, everybody, for taking time to come and meet in person. I know it definitely puts a little bit more constraint on your personal time and such, but this is what we stand for. I think this organization has grew. I've been part of this organization for 11 years now, and I can see that the biggest rewards that I have being part of this organization, besides learning the science and the outcomes part, it's just like getting to meet each other, getting to know each other, learning from each other. So welcome. So to that effect, today we did not have the board meeting because we had a whole day of wonderful program that was accompanied that was established by Dr. O'Brien. So we had a board meeting a week before that, and I can just summarize what we talked about. Could I just go forward with this one, Eddie? Oh, right. So a couple of updates from the relentless effort of Eddie and Terry. We have one more member that has joined our family, Riverside Regional Medical Center. And I don't know if there is any representative here. I just like to thank you and welcome to the family of VCSQI. That brings us to what? 27 out of 30. Yeah. And that's a pretty big accomplishment in a short duration of the time. So thank you to Eddie and Sherry for that one. The other thing that we discussed at this board meeting was how to establish some kind of rules regarding engagement with the industry, because an organization of our size certainly is getting attention of industries such as Abbott and Merck and things of that nature. So we just wanted to have a rule and a statement that was circulated among the board members, and it was approved. And did we also give it to the members at large, to everybody? So we will circulate with you and then seek your input before we formalize it. And what it comes down to is, yes, as an organization, VCSQI is interested in partnering with the industry. However, we will never be, not going to mince the words, we won't be sold to them for any amount of the price. So we will be very independent, and those who want to collaborate while holding an office or being a member of the VCSQI, there has to be very strict disclaimer of conflict of interest. So that's really the order of the industry partnership. We also reviewed briefly our financial strength, and I can tell you that our organization is very strong. And just to give a nutshell, our budget is allocated into different investments in such a way that at any time, if we need to, well, on the hard times, we have 1 year worth of budget to support the organization. So it's held very responsibly. And Dr. Lansley has kind enough to take up the treasurer post. So he's also sort of working with Merrill Lynch, is our advisor regarding our asset allocations. So we are carefully working with them, and we will share with you once we make some more decisions on that. The other item that we discussed at this last board meeting was how to fill in 1 year gap where we don't have the vice chair position of the individual. So the way that our leadership organization is structured is the chair serves for 2 years, and the chair who is incoming will serve as the vice chair for 1 year. That leaves a gap of 1 year where you don't have the vice chair. And we just asked different ideas, and I think of the many ideas that came up, I really like the idea that Eve has proposed, which is to assign that role to a member or a, somebody in the leadership role who already is serving for the organization, so that it will be a default member. So, for example, what Eve suggested was, I'll talk to Dr. Lancy. Sorry, I'm just putting on the spot here. So, a treasurer who's part of our organization could be the default place for that 1 year in the event if that situation arises with the position. So, we're still discussing, and one important thing that I like to seek from all of you is the nomination for the vice chair is coming up, and we usually have the person selected by 1st of January of 2024. So anybody who's interested in, or anybody that who knows that somebody would like to nominate, please forward those names to Eddie and Sherry, so that we will certainly like to welcome them and go through the vetting process, and then we certainly will share with you who that person is come January 1st. So those are the briefs from the board meeting, and I have very good agenda here, but I don't want to delay it any further.
And there's just one more. There's just one more piece I think we wanted to recognize was our new board members.
Here are the additional board members that we have added on to the board since we met last time. Cindy Cole from Centera Lynchburg. Is Cindy here? All right, welcome, Cindy. Great. And everybody knows Eve Dallas from UVA. And Jeff Beneke from Winchester. Jeff. But welcome on board, Jeff. And Dr. Lancy has taken up the role of treasurer for the VCSQI. Thank you all, and I welcome to the organization.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cotter. And with that, we are going to jump in right into some quality and cost data updates from our VCSQI repository. So we're going to run through and first of all, just show off what we have available as part of our registry here, which is literally hundreds of thousands of adult cardiac, cath PCI, chest pain MI. There's TBT as well, which didn't even make this list. Through that, we have accomplished thus far over 80 plus published manuscripts, half of which have just been over the last few years, just showing the proclivity of our research and writing committee and the good work that the folks at UVA have done. This is also powering 5+ statewide initiatives, one of which we'll hear about tonight with readmissions. And of course, our meetings, collaborative forums, and listservs and online resources, which have helped the quality improvement ball keep rolling here. So in terms of the registry, that's what we're getting into in the first talk here. Really, the 4 main components that I just mentioned are the STS adult cardiac, ACC cath PCI, our VHAC STEMI database, which we covered pretty extensively in the first part of our day-to-day with the VHAC state meeting. And then the newest one is the STS ACC TBT registry for our transcatheter patients. All of that is either linked with or being linked with the VHHA financial data. So it gives us a cost component, a costing component that complements the quality level analysis. So we'll see both sides here in just a minute. We're going to start with adult cardiac with a few slides for each of the registries. So the first one we have here is intra-op blood use. Eve, sorry if I steal a little bit of your thunder here, but just wanted to showcase a little bit how these charts are formatted. If you all are part of our quarterly report updates, you'll recognize some of this, but what we essentially have here is de-identified hospital groupings on the bottom. We're comparing 4-quarter intervals with one another. So the prior rolling 4 quarters with the most recent rolling 4 quarters, which is updated through Q2 of 23. Those are grouped by hospital volume, in this case, cabbage volume, low, medium, and high, which medium is 100 to 200 cabbages a year, high is 200 or more. And then sorted by performance within each group. So you notice the little blue bars kind of step ladder up within each grouping. Those are also tested for statistical significance to see if there are any outliers, indicated on the bottom with an asterisk or a plus sign, and then benchmarked against the VCSQI and the STS averages where applicable. So this first metric is intra-op blood use. This is any intra-op blood component transfused. This is where we have a VCSQI benchmark of 18% versus the STS national benchmark of about 25. So we have some top performers here that have been transfusing blood at a very low rate for a large number of years. One of our earliest VCSQI initiatives was a red blood cell transfusion protocol, which I believe a number of the centers are still using. Please feel free to stop me if you guys have questions or comments, thoughts on any of this. Next is new onset of AFib. So this is any AFib that is not a recurrent AFib patient. Here, the VCSQI average is just a couple of percentage points below that national benchmark, excuse me, of STS, so 23 versus 26. And you'll notice some variation again within the programs. Also, if you compare a site's yellow bar against their blue bar, you'll see kind of how they've been trending in the last year. This is another area where VCSQI has worked to establish an amiodarone protocol and recommendations a number of years back. Some folks are looking at the data here, so I'm just gonna pause while you absorb it in a little bit. I know these are a little data intensive. We'll try to get as much bang for our buck here with the data template. Okay, are we good? And the last one, this is an area that we've worked on over the last, I would say about a year and a half or so, with Sherry, with Mike, Judy, with Chris, who just retired, which is renal failure and acute kidney injury. So renal failure here is defined as AKI stage 3 by the RIFLE criteria, so the tripling of serum creatinine or creatinine greater than 4. Here, the VCSQI average looks commensurate with that of STS, so 1.05 versus the 1.0 national benchmark. What we don't see here is that the VCSQI statewide average of our 17 programs has actually decreased about 50% in the last year. So we were at about a 1.5 OE ratio for our 17 centers, and that has since dropped down, again, now to about a 1.0. So sites are reducing their renal failure rates. You'll see a lot of those blue bars are significantly smaller than the yellow bars, and folks are starting to move the needle, hopefully with the help of some of the AKI recommendations that we have released within the last year or so. And if you're looking for any copies of these protocols or recommendations, we can definitely share those with you too. So that was STS. We have a couple of views of our ACC CAT PCI population next. So the first one we kind of teased earlier in the VHAC meeting. This one shows radial access site, not just for STEMI patients, but for all PCI procedures, where we see across VCSQI about a 68% radial usage, compared with the ACC benchmark we have of 54. So overall, VCSQI centers are using radial access more often than the national rate. However, there still are a few centers over on the right side of those volume groupings that are lower. And we have done some research showing the disparate outcomes between radial and femoral patients too. Dr. Cotter? Yeah.
Just an open question regarding this radial artery access, probably directed towards the intervention cardiologist here. What are the impediments to using the radial artery access in the programs where they use less frequently? And is there any drive from the ACC or other organizations to make that as a standard of care?
Any of our cardiologists have feedback on that? Countess? Oh. Sorry. Dr. Cotter was asking about the ACC and if there's any sort of drive or initiative to increase that radial access.
Not that I'm aware of. I think obviously the current recommendations are radial for everybody if they have access, including STEMI patients. I think they're either a class 1 or 2A recommendations because of the substantial reduction in bleeding that's seen. I think if you look at this data from 5 years ago, you're seeing a substantial difference in what we did before. I'm still surprised that we're running that high with femoral access and that typical rates. I think we're in our hospital, we were just discussing that earlier, what our rates were. I think we're at VC, we're probably above 90% for the majority of our cases. And I think Lynchburg was above 80s. So I think as what you'll see is the older cardiologists retire. The younger ones have more facile at performing that intervention. The downside is that with the limited access, the limited amount of femoral access we're doing, that you lose expertise in that area. And I think that's been a concern in some of the training programs that if you're doing 90% radial, you get very good at it, but 10% femoral, your complication rate may go up, especially the ones that you're transitioning from radial to femoral. You're transitioning because of difficulty in access, which automatically puts them at a higher bleeding rate from the femoral access range. And on top of that, not only do you lose expertise by people doing the procedure, at least we had transitioned to nurse pulling sheaths a long time ago. The number of nurses that have expertise in doing that is also dropped off substantially. In fact, I think what we've done now is most of our TICU nurses are the ones that pull the femoral sheaths because our floor nurses just don't see it that frequently. So like with anything, there's a trade-off, clearly a reduction in bleeding complications, but you may see an increase in femoral complications for a number of different reasons.
Yeah, I would echo what Mike said. I think as you see the demographic of cardiologists shift younger, you're going to see a higher radial use. Although most of the guys in my program, trained during the femoral era and have since adopted radial. We're in the 80-something% most of the time. We definitely prefer radial. It's just a lot less to worry about when the nurse calls you. 2 a.m. with the patient with back pain. You go, oh, I did a radial. I don't have to worry about a retroperitoneal bleed. But I would echo Mike's concerns about sort of femoral management abilities. One thing we have done though is we've adopted ultrasound for femoral access. I think that's really decreased our femoral complications, really being able to locate a healthy segment of vessel above the bifurcation has been useful. But I'm still surprised that the ACC median is what it is. With the guidelines, I would expect it to be much higher.
Very good. Thanks for your comments here. The ACC benchmark we're showing here might not be the exact latest. It might be from 21 or 22, just FYI. We don't get this data directly from the national societies, so we have to rely on our database managers to send it over to us. Sometimes it lags a little bit. Next chart here is same-day discharge. So this is elective PCI procedures that have the operation performed and then are discharged on the exact same calendar day. See here, the VCSQI rate of 55% is commensurate with ACC of 53 or 54. But again, a really wide range of variation from 20% all the way up to over 80% between center. There are several sites out there that are working to increase the adoption of this technique too. So if anybody wants to volunteer, share what you're doing to help out, that would also be a concern. Now, last one for cath PCI. Similarly, we're looking at AKI. This one, however, is stage 1 AKI, so it's a much more stringent criterion where you're looking at only an increase of 0.3 milligrams per deciliter in the creatinine. Still, the rates are relatively low. What we're looking at about an observed rate of 7.88% across VCSQI centers. This is also dependent on patients who have their both their baseline and post-procedure creatinine measured, so the denominator can vary from center to center. That said, our observed to expected ratio is right around where the ACC would predict with this one. So because we addressed STEMI earlier, I'm going to skip over the STEMI database for right now, but if you're interested in those slides, we'll be sure to send those out to everybody from the VHAC meeting. I want to share, I think the first time that we presented TBT data with this collaborative. So we have, at this point, 7 centers who have submitted some sort of TBT data to us over the last year. We've backloaded data where it's not just the last quarter or two, but we've got a full 2 or 3 years from a few centers and about 3,000 TAVRs, a number of MitraClips and TMVRs in the database as well at this point. So at this point, we're looking at 3,017 TAVR procedures across the last 2+ years. The first measure here is in-hospital mortality. So we're looking anywhere between about a 0.4 to 2% rate. This is not risk adjusted. Please keep that in mind. Patient population could vary between center, but we just wanted to look at the overall in-hospital mortality rates as a first step here, with VCSQI's averaging right around 1%. Little simpler chart here too. There aren't multiple colors and things like that. We're getting there. Another measure for TBT is new permanent pacemaker placed. And VCSQI average is about 8%. We're looking at, again, some variation here between 3 and 10% by program, again, with varying patient acuity. So please keep that in mind as we start to slice in, and we can start looking at looking at different segments of the population and hopefully adjusting for differences in population and case mix. Go ahead.
Sapien or Evolut? I mean, the type of valve, or just
we'll have to, if as long as it's an element that's captured in the database, we can break it out by that. So assuming that we're capturing that in the registry, yes, we can definitely drill down by that level of detail. Thanks for the suggestion.
Eddie, hey, it's Jeff. I have my hand up. Is that data collated between self-expanding valves versus balloon expanding valves, Edwards versus whatever other valve? Because there's a great difference in the rate of need for cardiac pacemakers based on if it's self-expanding or non-self-expanding. Have we filtered that out?
These data are looking at all comers, so we're looking at all TAVRs on this view. But again, assuming that is a data element that is captured within TBT, yes, we can either exclude those cases or break them out separately.
I think it would be educational to have it broken out, to find out if, we're getting the same results the rest of the country is with self-expanding versus balloon expanding valves.
Very good. Thanks, Dr. Rich. Our last TBT chart here just shows average length of stay by center. This was a piece, Mike, you had asked about in terms of the ACC reports not being able to necessarily break it out in a level of detail, for instance, even year over year. So VCSQI having access to the patient level data, we can break this out and trend the data in any number of ways that would be helpful to you all. Again, we see variation here, not adjusting for case mix, but length of stay is between about 1.7 and 3.9. And these are just by alphabetical order in terms of the hospital code. So this is not by volume. This was just how it's sorted on the Excel sheet. Sorry, good point, Dr. White. I didn't want the labels changing, so you have to unpick for your guys' code. And so our last one, I know we're a little over time here, so I won't go into too much detail on how we've matched the cost data, but needless to say, it's a pretty detailed process where we get the data from our partner, Virginia Hospital and Healthcare Association. There is a process to match up those claims records with the registry data like we just saw in the last few slides. From there, we have a charged costs procedure that takes coefficients from CMS and adjusts the charge data into estimated payer costs. So what you're seeing is a proxy for procedural cost on the next couple slides here. This shows right now we just have STS adult cardiac and ACC cath PCI. There are about 70,000 cases that have been matched in the adult cardiac surgery world for a match rate of 97%. For PCI, it's a little bit lower. We're still trying to figure out some bugs in the matching, but we still have been able to match almost 18,000 procedures to the charge data on that side. I think the inpatient outpatient distinction has been a little bit of a pickup there, but we'll still see some interesting data. A concept we've talked about in the past in VCSQI is additive costs. So what are the additive costs of complications? How much does a baseline procedure with no complications cost a hospital versus what is the cost when the patient then incurs a major incident like a stroke, like prolonged vent, like reoperation, like renal failure. So here we see on the STS side, we're looking at this is correct here still. Additive costs between $12,000 for AFib and up to $80,000 for renal failure. So quite a bit of variation here, but based on the type of complication, but just goes to show you when there is an adverse event, it will sometimes double, triple the overall cost of surgery. We see the same thing on the cath PCI side of things. Actually, I had a different slide that had shock and heart failure. So we'll be sure to send those out, but the numbers were similar here where shock added about 30,000, heart failure was 25 or so. Here we have AKI at 25, bleeding at 40. Bleeding was the most expensive on the cath PCI side. So thanks everybody for checking out our data. Again, this is sort of the cornerstone of a lot of the work we do within VCSQI. So all of your comments, suggestions for the database are most appreciated. We'll be sure to send out the slides to everybody. And again, just appreciate all your engagement and involvement with our organization this evening and for all you do. And that really is the end of my talk. I'm going to pass the mic over to our next presenter. He's already been introduced this evening, but I think we can't say enough about Eve. She wears a lot of hats. She's a perfusionist. She's a member of our VCSQI board. She attends our quality committee, research and writing committee. I think you're on every committee that we have, aren't you? But somehow you find the energy to come this evening and share some great information about our latest and greatest.
Great. And Eddie, can I ask a question before we leave the last topic? You said cath PCI with bleeding. I know that's been a real sore point for the interventionalist. You know, like how do you define bleeding, and how are we defining it based on ACC criteria? Would a drop in hemoglobin or hematocrit, or I'd like to hear from the cardiologist on the call. Like, do you think that's a fair way of monitoring this, because it's been very controversial in the ACC about what's bleeding and what's not bleeding.
So we're going by the ACC's definition here. I'd have to call on Myra, one of our folks on the cardiology database manager side, for the exact definition. I'm not going to get into that level of detail, but we can send out the specific criteria that they're using there, Dr. Rich. I think it is a pretty stringent. It is a pretty stringent definition, isn't it?
Less than 3 drop in hemoglobin, or
A less than 3 drop in hemoglobin. That's okay. Sorry to put you on the spot, but
Yeah, no. Maybe we could put a cardiologist on the spot because I think that the definition for bleeding is very controversial in the ACC database. And so I was just wondering if we're adhering to the definition of the ACC, and is it just, basically when you give somebody a liter of saline and their hemoglobin drops, in a post procedural follow up, what do you do? And, is it fair?
so we are using the ACC definition. I see Cindy's got her hand up, so I'm gonna hand you the mic, Cindy.
I don't really have the ACC definition in my head, but it's got to be a drop of 3 or less. I think 3 or I think it's really more 4, which go ahead. 4 blood transfusion, correct. But also has to involve the documentation that's inclusive of what the bleed may be from, is there GI bleed, et cetera, those type things. And once you can document that, that should be included in your extraction as you go through it. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thanks. No, just trying to be fair. That's all.
Very good. Well, Eve, without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you. And yeah, the clicker should be working there. Perfect. Thank you for being with us.
I appreciate the time to come up here and talk about this specific subject. I also appreciate the fact that I have perfusion in my house. So you guys take it easy on me. These are a work in progress. I just wanted to say that the slides that Eddie threw up there and the ones that you usually see on a quarterly basis are what inspired me to start wondering if we could dive into the data a little bit differently. I asked Eddie and Sherry if we could do that. I was pulling out certain slides and putting them up in the pump room and asking my teammates to look at them, and they were appreciative of the slides, but it really wasn't our language. And so I thought maybe we can create some metrics in our language. There are a couple of other registries around the country. There's one down in Australia and New Zealand that's pretty famous for creating a lot of research and evidence-based practice and metrics, but this one's a little bit unique. And so I hope you'll find something that interests you in this. We call it perfusion specific, but I think if you recognize that cardiopulmonary bypass is like the one thing about cardiac surgery that makes it different, right? And we're not just any other surgery. We are cardiac surgery, and that's because we use cardiopulmonary bypass. And so because of that, what kind of things can we find out? So we dove into the FTS data, and here are some of the things that we found out. So this is just a basic demographic chart. I think that really the only thing about this chart that might be different for you is to look at bypass and cross-plant times. We put those means up there. If you consider for future slides as well, when I'm talking about SCS major cases, Eddie taught me this. For SCS major cases, what we're going to consider are the CABG, AVR, AVR CAB, MVR, MVR CAB, MVR, MVR and CAB. That's mitral valve replacement. So it's these first 7 columns that we'll be referring to as SCS major cases. Also for the perfusion folks, we put down our patient status at the bottom of the demographic chart. That's not something that we always consider or look at, and I thought it would be interesting for perfusionists to be able to see the status of their patients. These slides do get busy. I love that you're looking at them and not at me. That makes me feel really comfortable. Note also these slides are available. The intention is to send them out to all of the perfusion members that have signed up with Sherry and given her contact information. So if you want to know if these slides are available to you and you're not seeing them, ask your chief or ask your perfusion team if they have given their contact information to Sherry and Eddie. And if they have, they'll get these slides. So here we're looking at pre and intra-op hematocrit versus intra-op transfusion rates. These are all on pump cases. And you'll see that the yellow bar indicates your pre-op hematocrit. Your blue bar is your intra-op hematocrit. What's interesting from a perfusion's perspective here are several different things. The yellow bar indicating where your patient is when they come into the OR. And it makes me wonder if your hematocrit is not quite where you think it should be, has your institution considered a pre-op anemia clinic? Is anybody willing to say, does anybody here have an active program right now for pre-op anemia? Fantastic. Yeah. If you don't, that might be something you consider because you really do want both of these bars to be maximized, both your pre-op hematocrit and intra-op. Bear in mind, intra-op hematocrit includes the pre and post bypass as well. So this is not a bypass hematocrit. This is including that full operative time. That being said, the patient's hematocrit is bound to be lowest when they're about because of hemoglobin. So we see in the blue bars the effect of possibly interventions by your anesthesia team and your perfusion team, including minimizing your circuit, decreasing your hemodilution. Maybe you have a wrap program. Maybe you're wrapping 60, 70, 80%, or even 100% of all your patients. That's going to increase your intra-op hematocrit as well. And it could also include other interventions by anesthesia, A&H that they gave back. Or just a reduced crystalloid load by anesthesia during the bypass round. And you'll see that the lines intersecting are, of course, intraoperative blood cells, and then the purple line is all blood products. A lot of information in one second. Right. The next set of slides, and I was looking at what Eddie threw up earlier when we were talking about STF cost additives, clearly with renal failure all the way to the right-hand side, and the kind of massive cost for AKI and renal failure. It's no secret why we talk about it all the time and consider it all the time. Not to speak of the load to our patients and the patients' families when they have to experience those kind of incidences. So again, a little bit of a busy slide, but believe it or not, they're actually a bit busier. This is AKI and pre-op anemia. Notice that across the bottom of on all three boxes, you're seeing a significant statistical number there. If you consider our patients who do contract their AKI stage 1, 2, or 3, a significant number of them come in with pre-op anemia. Now we're talking about AKI, and we're talking about intraoperative hemoglobin less than 7. Again, remember that all of this data is data that's available to us through FTS. We don't have any customized perfusion data yet. I'm looking at you, Judy. We don't have any yet, so we're mining this out. We're extracting this out from what we get from STS. And we can see our patients when they get an intraoperative hemoglobin of less than 7. And again, we see some statistical significance between patients whose hemoglobin drops less than 7 and whose hemoglobin stays at 7 or greater during the intraoperative period for all 3 stages. Oh, did I mention these are cavities only? Let me make that clear. And these are cavities only. We'll try to get a.
Hi,
Okay,
I was wondering. Yeah, I was wondering if you could define what stage 1, 2, and 3 are for AKI.
So stage 1, Dr. Rich, is creatinine rise of 0.3 milligrams per deciliter or 50% increase in serum creatinine. Stage 2, I'll come back to that one. Stage 3 is a tripling of serum creatinine or creatinine greater than 4.0 with at least a 0.5 rise. And then stage 2 is anything in between there.
Right, and these are post-operative values.
Yeah, from pre to post, Chris, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Eddie. Hmm. Not yet.
We can. So Dr. Wyatt, for those who didn't hear him, asked if we had looked at post-op hematocrits, and we have not yet, but we definitely can do that.
This kind of collection of metrics at this point perfusion specific. And so we have less of an impact on that postoperative period. So it's like kind of kept it to the intraoperative period for now. But we can definitely do that as well. So on this slide, we see AKI versus intraop hemoglobin less than 7 and red blood cells. So what's worse than hemoglobin less than 7? Hemoglobin less than 7 and transfusion red blood cells. First line you see is hemoglobin less than 7. Second line is hemoglobin greater than or equal to 7. And then each column is a stage of AK. Again, you can see, yeah, you can see the p-values for each of those.
One question, is, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll do my best.
This may not be something we can answer. Where in the intra-op was that sample taken? Initial, halfway, at the end,
It's
The
just the
longest.
lowest value.
the lowest value? Thank
Mhm.
you.
It's not what we can't define it. It's just the lowest value. Thank you for that question. Any other questions or comments in particular? I think we have one more AKI slide. Is this interesting? Yes. Good. Notice as well, I wanted to point out, in case you, it is busy, and I just wanted to make sure you did pay attention to the incident rate on stage 1 is 0 to 40, and then on stage 2 and 3, thank goodness, 0 to 10. So we did the graph to look the same, but not similar. Yes, sir.
Talk about this is if at some point we can include DO2 with this, because it just, Mike and I were saying, it's disturbing to see that,
Yeah.
because, you know, I think 6-7 years ago, one of the nephrologists at UVA spoke at one of the meetings talking about renal DO2 being a huge issue with AKI. And I know we're all putting down. But
Aren't we all
can be.
confused? I mean, come on.
We can certify you at the end of the meeting. But it's disturbing because for us, I mean, now that we're in a lot of places using DO2I, you know, if you're sitting there and your DO2I is 240 and you've got somebody who's got risk factors for AKI, what do you do?
Yeah.
That's disturbing for us.
Agree. And I would love nothing more than to be able to lay out a DO2 over this, but of course, again, with SDS, we would have, and I'm not saying that will never happen, but that would be sort of like a customized perfusion.
Programs that are participating.
Yeah.
That use DO2I, if we could just do maybe some case studies to show it, because at a hemoglobin less than 7, I'm certain, would you guys be certain that your DO2I is probably around 180 to 20?
Yeah,
Especially if
it's a
especially if
great
somebody who
point.
weighs 100 kilos.
Yeah, it's a great point, Mike, of course, as always, but again, I'm not going to say that we will never be able to achieve any kind of DO2 data, but right now we can't. And so that is and that's the conversation you're having with your anesthesia group and your surgeon during the surgery, looking at all the parameters in DO2, one of them for sure. I'll just thank you, Mike, for that. I'll just go along here. So there's 3 of these slides. they're similar. This is AKI, intra hemoglobin, and red blood cells based on number of units transfused. And these slides, there's stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. And these I thought were interesting, and they're based on some questions that one of my attending anesthesiologists asked, which was, does it matter if I just give 1 or give 3? Will it affect my AKI? Right. I'm interested to know if you guys want to speak up or if anybody else wants to speak up, but I'm thinking about taking the 4+ units off of the graph. In my opinion, if we're giving 4 or more units in cardiac surgery, it's because of a blood loss issue and not a transfusion trigger. So my consideration is that we may take that off of the side because it may not be sensible. So there's stage 1, here's stage 2. Okay. Again, prevalence on the left-hand side is 0. Sorry, for stage 1, of course, it's what do you know? Stage 2, again, top line less than 7, transfusing 1, 2, or 3 minutes, and then bottom line greater than or equal to 7, no blood, 1, 2, or 3. You can see that there's a trend on 1 unit, or if your patient is being perfused with a hemoglobin of 7 or greater, and you are transfusing blood at that point, it's because either your transfusion trigger is high, or as Mike was speaking to earlier, you're getting an indication that you're not perfusing and you're not giving enough oxygen to your patient, so you're going to transfuse for that as well. You can see that for 1 unit, if your hemoglobin is 7 or greater, you're trending towards, like tripling your stage 2 there. In that case, you might want to consider what your transfusion trigger is as a standing matter. Stage 3, same data. Again, prevalence here is 0 to 30%. A patient with a hemoglobin of 7 or greater intraoperatively with no red blood cells stands at 1.7%. And as soon as we transfuse 1 or 2 or 3, that's what we've done to their risk for stage 3 AKI. Okay, those are the fun ones. So a couple more slides. Going back to something that kind of Mike was alluding to. Mike was involved in a VCSQI committee that wrote and published to the VCSQI community a set of AKI reduction guidelines. One of those guidelines for VCSQI is use of cerebral oximetry. So I've included a couple of slides in here to try to start tracking and measuring who is using cerebral oximetry, when they're using it, how often they're using it, and can we show any kind of tracking of transfusion of red blood cells based on cerebral oximetry? In other words, if our cerebral oximetry drops during bypass and it's showing that we may not be perfusing what we want to the brain, is that a trigger in and of itself to transfuse, regardless of any other trigger?
Does everybody in the VCSQI use cerebral oximetry?
No. So that's a fantastic question. It's almost like I planted you in the audience. So I do wonder for some of these folks, some of the folks represented here on the graph that show that they either never use it or they only use it what looks like less than 10%. Is that and you guys, all you folks maybe can answer that. Is that a reflection of a reporting not mistake, but glitch, or are they in fact not using it?
Right, and I was struck on your very first slide where there was transfusion rates based on intraoperative hematocrits, and I couldn't see a correlation between the intraoperative hematocrit and transfusion rates, and I just wonder, how much of that is driven by perfusionists, how much of that is driven by surgeons and how much of that is driven by cardiac anesthesiologists. You know, it struck me as not sort of correlation with hematocrit, intraoperative on pump hematocrit versus transfusion rates. And what are your thoughts? Does the Perfusion Society, you must have a National Perfusion Society, do they have criteria for intraoperative transfusion rates, or what are your thoughts? How do you interact with the team that's in the operating room and decide when a patient gets a transfusion on pump?
Yes, great question. Thank you. It is a team sport. And so perfusion we have all the dials, we have all the numbers, and we have all the indicators in front of us. And it's up to the perfusionist to communicate with the anesthesia team and the surgical team, and together make a decision whether it's time to transfuse or not. There is no magic one case suits all. It will be based on the acuity of the patient. It'll be based on how long the bypass runs. It's based on how much urine the patient is making. It's based on how well I can flow that patient. And, you guys are looking at records and charts. You might see some flows that are a little bit lower and some that are higher. That's based upon my patient volume. It's also based upon how my patient's cannulated and what kind of volume I'm getting back at the time. So there is no one answer to that, but it is a team decision based on one or more parameters that we're looking at and we're communicating with the other team about, that indicate to us that we're going to need to transfuse this patient because the oxygenation is just right.
Because the patient may be compromised. And I can tell you honestly, all the years that I was a surgeon, I never got involved in conversations between perfusion and anesthesia about transfusion. All I wanted to do was get the operation done. And I was leaving it to you guys to figure out when they need to be transfused and all that sort of stuff. So I was just curious, like, what do you do? What are the parameters that you do? You said cerebral oximetry. Do you have peripheral oximetry? Do you go by oxygen concentrations in your pump? How does that work?
Yes, and yes. Mike? He can do it, I promise.
No, I think that it's a complicated series of decision making, and I know it's not easy from your standpoint and from the anesthesiologist standpoint, but I've never got involved in saying transfuse this patient right now, unless that was a massive aortic rupture or something, and I needed to get blood into the patient. But that was about it. I left it all to you guys. So I know you guys communicate all the time, and I don't know if you do it by hand signals or how you do it, but I'm just interested as to whether there's been evolution of transfusion protocols in the minds of perfusionists and anesthesiologists over time.
Yeah, this is Mike from UVA. I would say one of the things that has really changed our practice in the OR over the last several years is the advent of being able to measure real-time VO2I. And so there's tons of literature coming out, which is saying that first we were looking at VO2Is of 270, 275, 280. Some places are now promoting 295 to 300. And so and part of this is to reduce AKI. I mean, Dr. Ranucci, most of his work was VO2I in the setting of AKI, how we reduce AKI. What we're finding as perfusionists, I think at least at our center, is in order to maintain some of these high VO2Is, we're having to transfuse more than we may have historically done so. So
and flow higher.
And we're flowing much, much higher than we originally did. But sometimes, what we normally would have thought of, say, a hemoglobin was 7.5 or 8, we would have accepted that on certain patients. That's not high enough now to meet a VO2I goal. So now we're in this position where we're struggling between transfusion rates and VO2I levels, which are I think there's a lot of merit for why they're the hot topic now, but we're kind of caught in
Right.
this. Should I or shouldn't I based on two competing values?
Right, and let me ask you a question. You say you're flowing, you feel historically like you're flowing at higher rates. Is that because we're using less vasoconstrictors, the anesthesiologists, and so they're vasodilated and you have to flow a lot higher?
I think we're using bigger pipes to accommodate that. I mean, and with a higher flow rates where, there's probably less need for as much vasoconstrictors, but our surgeons have started adopting larger cannulas in order to help us achieve those higher flow rates.
Right, because I remember I trained at Stanford for cardiac surgery, and we never paid attention to blood pressure. Flow rates was important, and we would just flow like hell, and the blood pressure wasn't important. But when I came here, it was different at Centera. We had more of a pressure focused mindset than a flow related mindset, and I'm sure that changes over time, and I'm sure that you and everybody else on this call have had to make adjustments or relearning in terms of, what's appropriate flow rate. We always at Stanford said flow rates were more important than pressure, and when I came here, pressure was more important than flow rates. So I don't know. It was an interesting discussion always, and I know that you guys get caught in the middle of it, and you guys work with anesthesia to make sure you're uh, kind of following what the institutional are.
Thank you so much for all those comments. Really appreciate it. Rich addition to the conversation. Yeah, it just is a team sport.
And
It just is a team sport, and we do
I
have.
just wonder what you.
Dr. Ritz, you're breaking up. You're breaking up, and I think we're going to have to move forward on this part of the presentation here.
So the next slide was a slide, I can remember what it was, indicating for those centers that are using cerebral oximetry at a rate of 40% or better, which procedures are they using it for? It looks to me pretty evenly spread out. So nothing very, I see. See, I told you I had my paper. Pay on. Just a couple in the last part. What we did was asked Eddie to. Here we go. There's a cerebral oximetry one that I was talking about, and again you can see not really a vast difference between which procedures folks are choosing to use it on. The N is 5,400, which again is pretty small based on a total case count, I think of like 17,000. Oh, I like that one. Okay. So while she's working on that, I'll just quickly run out of time anyway. The last couple of slides that I have that are available to you, if you'd like to see them, have to do with patient status for STS major cases. There we go. Just, I think, an interesting tab for perfusionists to look at to see what our patient acuity is coming in the room, and not something that we generally see. The next slide. That one. Here's the rate of, again, these are the STS major cases, like I said in the beginning, those first 7 columns, including the valves, but not a double valve, so not an AVR, NVR, and not the other category, which tends to be all the aortic surgery. So everything but that is included in this N of STS major cases. And those people that are doing more of a load of cases that have had any kind of previous intervention. I'm just going to close it out. It's fine. It's fine. A couple more again for your perfusionists that might be getting the slides, and you all, if you want to look at them. We broke down the previous cardiovascular intervention types for all STS major cases, including either previous PCI, previous CABG, previous valve, or previous other. Showing us as, again, the perfusion community, letting us know how many actual redo sternotomies we might be doing, right? Because we know if it's a previous PCI, not likely to be a redo sternotomy, but any of the other redos or previous interventions, we know how many redo sternotomies we're doing. And then the last one, I think is going to be an interesting metric to look at. It's not that interesting yet. Previous transcatheter interventions. Again, all STS major cases, including our valve replacements and our CABGs and our combined valves and CABG that have had a previous transcatheter procedure, TAVR, TMVR, pulmonary valve, or otherwise. Right now, the rate of incidence, it only goes to 3%, luckily. Thank you, cardiology. But I think it might be interesting to trace that over time and kind of see what happens to our TAVR patients, and do they come back to us for a SAVR? And we can see what that rate of intervention is. That is the end of the slideshow. Just to wind up, the very last thing is I asked Eddie just a couple of days ago if it would be possible to actually customize some of these slides for your institution. And of course he said yes, because he always says yes. So what we're going to work on in the next couple of weeks, I hope, is the ability to take some, probably not all, but some of these data slides and actually customize them so you can see, particularly for your institution and your fusion team, can pull these out and display them for their own interaction with your your cardiac surgeons and your anesthesiologists, specifically for your place. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Just want to thank you for all the hard work that you have put into developing this data set. Over time, it will definitely be of help in making some decisions, both intraoperatively and post-operatively in getting to the patients. I was just struck by the comment from, I'm sorry,
Mike.
I didn't get your name.
The two mics.
Mike,
For that one.
yeah, regarding trying to, maintain a certain amount of oxygen delivery.
Yeah.
And having to perhaps maybe unnecessarily transfuse when you would not have done otherwise.
Yeah.
Or to increase the flow rate and perhaps change the size of the cannula. So that's something that's really intriguing just to think about it. That we might think that we are heading with a good intention, but again, like we'll get stuck. That's what we don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. So there are a couple of interventions that are possible before you reach that point where you feel like you have to transfuse. And that's, again, it's a team sport, right?
Exactly.
So I can speak to my surgeon and ask them, maybe, can I cool this patient? Or can I take body temperature?
So while you're
I can try to improve, the volume that I'm getting from the patient, so I can push it out better. So I can, consider that as well. So there are a couple of interventions prior to that, but there will come a point in time when as a team you can make that choice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So as I was hearing that, something I heard from several years ago. Before I became a cardiac surgeon, I was an internist. Dr. Driver was a nephrologist, my attending during my residency long time ago, many months ago. And he's saying on the rounds, because I think one day I was calculating the sodium deficit or something for a stage 4 multiple acidosis on the rounds. And I was all over the place and trying to get the numbers. And then he was like, how much just give it? So, and his statement was an average kidney is smarter than the smartest nephrologist. And that stuck with me. we will figure it out.
Great comments. Thank you so much. So again, feel free to talk to your perfusionist, ask your perfusionist if they're getting this data. If they're not, ask them to be in touch with Sherry and Eddie and get on the contact information. We can send them out. If you want them to come directly to you, we can manage that too, I'm sure. And if anybody sees the slide and it causes you to think of something further that you'd like to see, let us know that as well, because this is a work in progress. And we intend for this metric deck to be bigger than it currently is. And so we're happy to, within the confines of FTS data, whatever we can get out, we're happy to push out to you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Eve, for all you do for our perfusion group and driving quality improvement for VCSQI. Up next, we have just a quick promo from our quality improvement advisor, Sherry White. Sherry is, for those of you who don't know, helps to run our quality initiatives. She's the glue that helps to bind VCSQI together. Sherry also holds it's called a MSPOD, a Masters of Science in Positive Organizational Development, which is something I didn't even know existed before I met Sherry. But she's here to help our organization develop positively and work on different protocol implementations across the spectrum for cardiac surgery, cardiology. So Sherry, please take it away.
Of course, that explains my bubbly attitude. So thank you. I promise I will be quick and do this real commercial intro quickly. So I wanted to take a moment and capture, just pay attention to the things that we accomplished together. So we look at data, we do research, we compare and create benchmarks against each other, and we create protocols that would improve metrics and the quality, cost, and just the care that we provide to our patients. So throughout our collaborative, we have created the AKI reduction protocol to the AKI work group. Thank you, Mike. We have an AFib protocol. We have a prolonged vent readmission, but of course, it's going to be revised pretty soon. And we have the red blood cell protocol. If you don't know what those protocols are, they live on our website and they're on the protocols. But something is missing. What is missing is, after we did the implementation of the protocols, what's the effect? Did we do well? Did the protocol work? Did it create, a decline in performance? So we need to circle back and we need your help in this regard. So in the summertime, I tested this theory, and this was based upon some feedback we received from the board. I sent you all a survey, and we received a lot of feedback actually, so thank you. I wanted to see if you implemented the AKI program. And I wanted to see how did it impact your performance over a 5-year period. So let's test it. Okay, so I created this type of metric, and please let me know if this makes sense. Eddie is a data guru, and I'm trying to channel his vibe. So I created this chart that I'm going to show you. And it overlays if the protocol was implemented or not in different stages. So if it's a flat line, nothing is there, the protocol was not implemented, or I did not receive a response from the survey. If there's a slight uptick, then that means that it was adopted but slightly modified. If it's in the middle area, it was implemented, but other strategies adapted as well, or they implemented other strategies, not necessarily a protocol. If it's at the 4th level, if you will, it was full adoption. And then if it's at the highest level, the organization or the program created their own protocol. So how did that impact performance? So you tell me what this is the feedback overlaid over 5 years performance for AFib. Again, you see these metrics, and the different outline bars tell the rate of implementation. So what we can tell that if someone or a program has implemented partially our protocol, implemented their own protocol, or full adopted our protocol, there was a significant change in their performance for the better. And off to the right side, that is the lower performance centers that I did not receive feedback. And the assumption is either maybe you didn't implement the protocol, or I really don't know because there was not any response. So I want to get your insight. How does this seem to you? Does this make sense? We want to help to analyze to see if these protocols really are working. What is the impact on the work that we're creating together? And this is just a visual element trying to evoke the spirit of VCSQI as it relates to data. So I will send these slides out to you. Please share your feedback. Does this make sense? Am I way off? Well, let me know. On your tables, you actually have a survey. And I know you all may get survey fatigue, but in order for us to know if these protocols are performing well or not, we need to hear from you. So I ask that you work with your programs as a team to let us know what level of implementation you took in these specific protocols. What we received over time is a different variation of responses. We can receive 5 different responses from ANOVA, let's say, for example, but everyone says something different. So we don't know really what happened. So we want to get a consensus of what the level of adoption is. And from there, we're going to analyze the barriers. We do know that there's other barriers as it relates to protocol adoption. Maybe it wasn't a focus at the time. Maybe it was just trouble getting buy-in. But if we can analyze what those barriers are, I would like for us to develop some type of work group to figure out how we can help you overcome those barriers. I think that was interesting. All right, so I am done. It is time for the main event, just desserts, the readmission work group, and I'm gonna give it back to Eddie because he has a fabulous introduction. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Sherry. I'm looking forward to getting everybody's feedback in terms of how we're implementing these different protocols across VCSQI, tracking our impact, how much we're moving the needle here. So last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Robert Lancy, who is, like many of you, wears a number of hats. He serves on our VCSQI board. He's our VCSQI treasurer. He's also been a practicing cardiac surgeon for over 25 years. He holds a MBA from Cornell. There's all sorts of accolades I can shower up on you, Dr. Lancy, but it's just a pleasure and honor to have you with us here this evening. And thanks very much for presenting to our group.
Appreciate it. Thank you. We will get you out of here at 7:30. I promise you that. I'm honored and very delighted to be able to speak to you tonight. I'm serving 2 roles. One is the front man for all the work that's been done that other people did, and the other is the opening act for Andre, who has much more interesting stuff to talk to you about. But this is really, I think, appropriately named Revisiting, Reimagining, and Reducing Readmissions. We're revisiting what was done previously about 7 years ago by the VCSQI. That's what the work group had undertaken. We've reimagined what readmissions are all about. I think when Medicare first attacked us with the Readmission Reduction Act, it was all about clinical quality, that we weren't doing a good job across the country as healthcare providers. Too many people coming back in, so we need to look at it as a value-based person metric and penalize hospitals, try to make them deliver better care. And after about 10 years of it, I think they finally got the message that it's not about clinical quality, it's about other factors. And I think we looked at some of those and uncovered some of those, and I'll share that with you in the next few minutes. So we all know about the readmission reduction program. I'll go over it quickly. It penalizes hospitals now, unlike many of the value-based purchasing metrics, which hold money back and then give it back to you. This is a pure penalty for high readmissions in certain areas. TABG was introduced a few years ago. And it's important on several levels. One, it's obviously the quality indicator, although again, I challenge the idea that it's all about clinical quality. I think it's less about that than it's more about socioeconomic issues. But for hospitals, it's publicly reported. So your reputation's on the line to some degree with it. For me, it's about patients. We do complex operations. I've had patients turn down open heart surgery just for the words open heart surgery. They know nothing about it. And I go and talk to them, they say, I'm not going to have my chest cracked. I'm not going to undergo that. When I was training in general surgery, no one said, I don't want an appendectomy. No one said, I don't want a cholecystectomy. But people say, I don't want open heart surgery. And the reason is it's a big deal for patients. And therefore, when they get home, it's a big deal. It's a big accomplishment. And I can tell you that walking into an ED or clinic and saying to a patient, we need to bring you back into the hospital, it's about the worst I've seen my patients. It's pretty devastating. Many of the heart surgeons, the audience will, I think, acknowledge that. It's pretty tough news to deliver to someone. So for me, it hits the patient. It's not about finance and it's not so much about reputation, but it's about telling someone, something We can't let you stay out there. You got to come back in. And it's pretty devastating for people. So that for me is the motivation. So what we did is first take a look at the readmission rates. And you can see here, and this is, I think, a plug to the VCSQI, you look at the readmission rates across time in that graph. And you'll notice that they've come down a bit from the 9%, 8% range down to 7%, 6% across the state. And overall, with STS, we're beating STS down at 8% versus 9%. I think a lot of this has to do with the work that was done previously. And if you look at the data that's been shown today earlier, whether it be an AKI or transfusion, if you look at the rates in the state, they're better than the STS. And I think a lot of it comes from the protocols that have been delivered by Eddie over the past several years. And hopefully we'll do the same with readmission. So what was done back in 2016, led by our present board president, Dr. Taylor, was a review of interventions to try to reduce readmissions. The importance of the discharge planner, I think, played a primary role, and they looked at it vertically across the patient's pathway, from preoperative, in-hospital, post-discharge, and then, invoking some basic interventions, basic patients, and some advanced interventions. I've read the document several times, and really a lot of good stuff. We went and revisited it starting last year and realized that a lot of programs hadn't adopted it. So we had our work cut out for us trying to figure out why that was and try to figure out how we could do a little bit better this time. So we came at it with a few different ideas, different guiding principles. Number one, that readmissions aren't due primarily to poor inpatient care. If you look at the different risk scores that have been developed around the country, they're not consistent. And when you take a risk score, which I developed with Columbia about 10, 15 years ago, and try to apply it to other programs, it doesn't work if you look just at clinical factors. So we tried to understand what is causing readmission besides clinical impact. The second is my own idea that the emergency room is a real slippery slide into the hospital. If you have patients that come into the ED, I think as harshly we've all encountered patients or their families in the hospital on morning rounds and say, what are you doing back in here? We don't know about it. They get in, they slip into the ED late at night with some chest pain or some shortness of breath or swollen ankles, and they're admitted. They get, of course, a troponin, an EKG, and an echocardiogram, and hopefully not a nuke the next day because they've already been revascularized. But they're in the hospital because they hit the ED. And I've seen this happen, and we did interventions where I was before to combat this and had great success with it. And I'll talk a little bit about those. But to me, if a patient gets to the emergency department, they're halfway toward readmission at that point. So we use that as one of our guiding principles. And the last one, which Andre will talk about a lot, is that demographics play a real major role in this. I think even more so than we gave credit to initially. I did some work with Columbia about 15 years ago. We looked at readmissions, and we were just puzzled that clinical impact and clinical factors didn't make much of a difference. And the fellow I was working with, Paul Kurlansky from Columbia, was actually talking with Medicare at that point about there's something more than just clinical. And I think they've come to the realization that socioeconomic factors do play a major role. So the work that we did initially started with an extensive literature search. What's out there? What are the risk scoring systems? What's been done? We don't want to repeat what's been done and reinvent the wheel, but we want to learn from it. And then Sherry pulled together a number of very productive meetings with a lot of VCSQI members, learning from them what interventions have they used, which ones work, what are some basic things, what are some more complex things, what are some novel ideas. So we pulled that all together. We then cataloged and classified a real laundry list of what can be done and what should be done, and maybe for which patients. And that's, I think, where we started to get away from the regular risk scores and saying, maybe we need to take and apply some of these interventions, particularly higher intensity interventions that are resource and personnel dependent, and apply them to people who are at high risk. And so that's where VHA came in, and they, with some fantastic data, and really kudos to Abraham Sabris and Christy Barnett and to Andre to really help us out with this and help understand what the role is of economic distress and socioeconomic factors in terms of readmission. So our idea and our goal is, which we are almost completed, is to develop a risk scoring system that takes into account the real important things for readmission, and then to try to identify those patients and apply to them the higher intensity, more resource intensive and more costly interventions to prevent readmission. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Andre. this is the fun part. This is where, I have learned so much about some theories that I have and have ideas about, and Andre is going to actually show us why it all makes sense. So.
Hey, Andre, sorry.
I'm not even talking to the microphone. Is this too loud?
Let me hear.
Okay, great. Awesome. So what I'm going to be talking about is an analysis using our inpatient database. And we joined our inpatient readmissions database. Let me just back up for a second. The Virginia Hospital Association is basically the central repository of every single inpatient encounter that has happened in the state. We have every single inpatient hospitalization that has occurred in every private hospital statewide for the past 10 years. And that presents an enormous analytics resource and capability for other organizations that we want to partner with. Now, usually we report this data, the trends in the payer mix, what percentage of your discharges are Medicare versus Medicaid versus commercial, all of this reporting generally back to the members. But in this case, we thought that there was a great opportunity to look at the correlation between rates of higher socioeconomic distress and higher rates of readmission by zip code using our inpatient database. And so we have several demographic factors that we have that we capture using our inpatient database. And one of those is patient zip code. And so that's a pretty great thing to have because there is another data set called the Distressed Communities Index that is published by the Economic Innovation Group. And that is a list of every single zip code in every single county across the country where this group, the Economic Innovation Group, assigns a Distressed Communities Index score to every single one of those zip codes and counties based on the rate of poverty, the rate of unemployment, the housing vacancy rate. And depending on that score, 0 to 100, 0 being the least economically distressed, 100 being the most, what if we took that zip level data and we joined it to our readmissions database? And that's what this analysis is. We ran a simple linear regression looking at the hundreds of zip codes in Virginia, looking at their readmission rate, and then looking at the economic distress level of that zip code. And what we found was a statistically significant correlation between zip codes with higher rates of economic distress and higher 30-day all-cause readmissions. Now, this was actually generated out of, we have readmission dashboards that relate specifically to congestive heart failure, COPD, CABG. And so one of the ideas as we were looking through the dashboards that we have together in the work group was Dr. Lancy was, well, let's sort all of the zip codes with the highest levels of economic distress and look at their readmissions. And I said, I'll do you one even better. Let's do linear regression. And that's what this is. And so you're able to see, all of those dots, the heat map is readmissions for zip code, the orange being higher levels of readmission, the blue being lower. But you're also able to look at the zip dots here is the scatter plot, and the p-value is less than 0.5. You can see that there's a lot of variability between economic variation at a zip code level, but you can still put a model that makes sense. And if you run that line through all of those zips, you can see a correlation. And so in addition to looking at this regression between higher levels of readmission and economic distress, we also looked at higher levels of poverty versus levels of economic distress or readmission, all-cause readmission. And so, the economic distress level is an aggregate score based on a variety of factors, but we just wanted to look at specific factors and run the same linear regression, just replacing poverty with, or replacing economic distress with poverty. And we found an even stronger correlation. That p-value is even lower than what we were looking at before. Then we looked at zip codes with a higher percentage of Black or African-American population, even stronger p-value. You can see how that line skews upwards even more so. So, well, what is this data really telling us? And that's kind of the big takeaway here is what now that we are looking at higher levels of economic distress and higher rates of readmission, what is this telling us? Well, before we get into that, I just want to take you to a couple of hotspots real quick. Couple of readmissions hotspots. So this, what you're looking at is a zip code. This is zip codes of patient origin. And so 23310, this is in the Eastern Shore. It's that little peninsula between Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic Ocean. It has one of the highest readmissions for all cause 30-day readmissions in the entire state. If you look at the bottom, you can see the grand total readmission rate is 14.23% versus the statewide 30-day readmission average of 11%. That's 3 percentage points higher than the state average. And you can see the rate of poverty is, I'm just looking at the top here, I'll just look at the screen, 15.95% in the zip code versus 11%. It has much higher percentage of adults not in work. There's been a negative change in employment there. It has a higher average housing vacancy rate. That's actually more than double the statewide average housing vacancy rate. I mean, and if you look at the payer mix, it's primarily Medicare and Medicaid patients. And so you can imagine that a lot of this obviously is driven by cardiovascular diseases that typically forms the plurality of readmissions and inpatient admissions. But I want to actually ask, how many chain grocery stores do you think are in this zip code? Just a quick guess. One chain grocery store. And this is a big zip code. I mean, to drive from the top to the bottom of this zip code is 45 minutes. There is one Food Lion. So think about how difficult it is. I mean, you're doing all of this work when you see a patient in the inpatient, and then they get discharged. Are they going to take the medication? Do they even have access to primary care or healthy food? If you live in this zip code, you have access to one Food Lion. I mean, think about that. Probably has an impact on the health outcome of the patient, regardless of, you know, that'll have an effect on the patient's behavior, no matter what kind of medical care is rendered. Let's look at another spot, 23937. This is in South Central Virginia. This is a little bit south of Farmville. If you guys have ever heard of Fort Mitchell and Drake's Branch, this has an economic distress score of 97.08. The max is 100. There is absolutely nothing in this zip code, just in general. There is, once again, 2 grocery stores. They're both Food Lions. Don't know what the trend is there. But you can see that the poverty rate in the zip code is 21%, which is double the average for the state. 45% adults not in work in this zip code. 45%. Imagine the implications on the average income of what people are even willing to spend, or if they're even willing to seek healthcare, if that's an expense in their budget. And you can see also the housing vacancy rate is much higher. But if you look, the readmission rate for this zip code is 15%. That's 4 percentage points higher than the statewide average. And the hospitals that, you know, comprise the majority of these readmissions are Centra Southside and Centra Specialty Hospital at 45% and 21% of readmissions each. So just trying to paint a picture here of all these different zip codes. The zip code hotspots all have strong trends of high rates of poverty, high percentage of unemployment, businesses are leaving, there is housing affordability problems, and typically readmissions are driven by Medicare and Medicaid patients. I mean, the highest percentages and the variations are people that are covered by, you know, government plans, government-sponsored plans. And so in this zip code, I think it's particularly interesting because we were looking at rural counties or rural zip codes. This is actually in the city of Lynchburg. So it's not just to say, well, look at all of these rural communities where no economic development exists. No, it's the same way even in some urban communities. This is in the city of Lynchburg. It includes parts of Liberty University and the University of Lynchburg. Readmission rate, all-cause readmission rate, 14.7%. And 91% of the readmissions are patients that are admitted to Central Specialty Hospital. So what does this mean? Well, there are certain hospitals that have more of a direct impact on these zip code hotspots, and we should work collaboratively with one another so that we can attack these zip code hotspots at a hospital level. That way we can get down to the locality. So some of the broader health impacts on health policy, I know I'm kind of running out of time here, but the idea is that social determinants significantly influence health outcomes, and it complements the impact of the medical care. And so, you know, social determinants of health are interwoven with what actually happens to the patient. I mean, you could have a hospital that has no nursing turnover, fully staffed. I mean, the world-renowned physicians, you know, and everything. But if that patient gets discharged and they don't take the medication that you prescribe them, that's it. Their body they'll become dysregulated. They'll end up back in the hospital. Or if they don't have access to healthy food, if they don't have a car, so when they get discharged, where are they going to go? I mean, you know, an ambulance took them to the hospital. Now they don't have transportation to go to a follow-up visit. Or maybe they're just not answering the calls that your care coordination, case managers, post-discharge follow-up people are doing. And so that kind of, this social determinants of health influencing readmission supports a broader body of work that has been done to say that medical care and social determinants of health are equally as important, and that we need, as a healthcare system, to focus more on social determinants of health when we're thinking about strategies in readmission reduction. I mean, we have to start asking questions about how does the hospital reduce long-standing economic disparities in their community? Are hospitals and health systems designed to tackle those, you know, economic challenges? Is federal and state health policy designed to deal with readmission reduction in that way? As Dr. Lancy was saying, up until recently, not really. And so this also has implications on how readmissions are viewed. I mean, readmissions are typically viewed as a measure of performance, as a measure of clinical quality, as a measure of how well is this hospital doing. But as this data shows us, 3 years worth of data, that was Q1 2019 to the end of 2022, we have statistically significant correlations between social determinants of health and higher rates of readmission. And so is that really a measure of how well the hospital is managing the patients? Is it fair to say that since we know social determinants of health are frequently outside of providers' control, then to then look back and judge providers based on readmission rates? I think that's a valid question. And so I think, you know, what this is really trying to look at is it's trying to reimagine readmissions at a policy level, because the way that, you know, CMS formulates healthcare policies, the Hospital Readmission Reduction Program, is that they look at all the hospitals in a state, they rank them one against another, and they rate them based on readmission rates. Sometimes it's all-cause readmission rates, sometimes it's specifically for heart failure or COPD, and then for the bottom-performing hospitals, they have the worst readmission rates, they take money away from those hospitals. Now think about that. If I'm VCU Medical Center, I'm a major safety net hospital. There are high rates of poverty in parts of Richmond, typically indicating more medically complex and severe patients that present with more severe acuity. So what the government policy is designed is to inadvertently punish safety net hospitals because they're taking care of more sick patients in more economically disadvantaged areas. We have to rethink the way, as everyone that's involved in the healthcare industry, we have to rethink how we can change the healthcare system to tackle these problems more long-term. Because you can come up with individual readmission reduction and quality improvement strategies that will work at a facility level or at a care team level. But if you want to affect population health, if you want to drive down readmissions statewide, then you have to invest in these communities. There has to be greater access to care. People have to stop, a lot of people have, got to stop worrying about their medical bills and the financial repercussions of going to see a doctor, or ultimately, if there is something that the hospitals can do to treat things like housing affordability issues, whether that's through a grant or, maybe it's just talking to CMS, talking to these federal agencies and saying, how do we change the healthcare system to be a little less transactional and more focused on affecting the patient's behavior long-term using their socioeconomic data. And so that's essentially my part of the presentation. I'll give it back to Dr. Lancy. I know we're at 7:30.
So as Andre pointed out, the high correlations that he did as your VCSQI treasurer, any of you with Food Lion stock, I recommend to sell, sell, sell. I have about 10 or 15 minutes to talk. I'm going to transition into 2 minutes and let you out early on one condition, but you provide me feedback for what I asked you for. So just quickly, we ended up taking all these interventions and broken them down to 3 areas. Basic local stuff. That means stuff you can do in your division. Organizational stuff you have to get the organization doing, and resource intensive stuff you have to get the organization doing. It's going to cost some money, but get a return on their investment. And so we have all these ideas that we'll bring out, and I can share the slides with you. You can look at them. Really some neat things, everything from bracelets with your phone number on them so that patients know who to call, banners in the EMR that say this patient's coming in the ED within 30 days of heart surgery, call the heart surgery team. We made an agreement with our ED that we would come down and manage them. They love that. And so they would call us the minute the patient hit the door, and our readmission rate went from about 12% to 4% with this another organization. So finally, what we have done, and I'm going to call this the Fauner score. Eddie has helped me put together this scoring system, and this is for food for thought. I want you to take a look at it. Please feel free to get back to me on it. What we're trying to do is to develop our own scoring system that weighs heavily on clinical factors a little bit, but on non-clinical factors such as culture of the hospital, that they have sort of inherently high readmission rates anyways across all factors, and the stuff that Andre just talked about, the economic index. And I want you to take a look at the thing we left on your table. We're planning on moving forward with this and developing a scoring system we will send out along with the intervention saying, if you hit this level, you need to be talking about these resource intensive things that cost some money, but we believe they'll work. And so there's a lot more to it than that, but as I promised, that's the end of the 2 minutes. Now you owe me. Get back to me and let me know what you think about all this, okay? Thank you.
Well, wonderful work by our readmission team here this evening. I just want to thank everybody again for attending our fall quarterly meeting. A lot of good things in the works. Again, just want to keep moving the needle here, want to keep doing what we can to improve patient care via our collaborative network. So thanks all for being part of this group, for being part of VCSQI, and safe travels. So thanks again, everyone.